So am I like a book girl now? Hey, it's Sarah, and today we are talking about how I went from reading 2 books a year, or let's be honest, oftentimes 0 books a year, to reading 50 books this past year. Now, I know this isn't food or nutrition related, and that's usually what we talk about here on my channel because I am a dietitian, so that's just kind of what we do. But I did want to talk about this topic with you today because for me, this was health related. Trying to read more, one reason I wanted to do it was for my mental health, trying to spend less time on my phone, decrease my stress and anxiety, increase my attention span, all of that kind of stuff. But also I wanted to talk about it because even if you're a regular around here and you're not necessarily looking to try to read more books, a lot of the things that I did that helped me to read 50 books this past year are general habit change things that could apply to any type of habit you're trying to establish related to your health. And I've learned a lot through this whole process, so I've got my notes here with me and we're gonna get into it. So first off, I think it's helpful to know how I was coming into this reading goal. So for me, as far as my history with reading, I have never been a big reader. I know for some people they have the experience of like reading a lot when they're younger and then kind of falling out of it, and then if they're trying to read more, it's kind of like getting back into reading as an adult. But that was not the case for me. I never really read for pleasure. I of course read books because I was reading books for school, but books were not something that I gravitated towards in my free time as like a thing to do for fun. Now, I did read magazines, mostly my 17 magazine. When that thing came in the mail every month, I like snatched it up and grabbed it and like read the whole thing cover to cover because, you know, I had to know the 47 ways to tie a scarf or whatever was in there. So I did read that consistently. And then I also did read the kind of big books that have been popular over the past 20 years for kids and young adults. You know, Harry Potter, Twilight, Hunger Games, the Divergent series. But that was basically it. And I've wanted to be that person who read for fun, who read consistently for a long time now. But it seemed like, you know, I could never really get into a book. I could never really make it happen unless it was like something that was so gripping that I couldn't put it down. Otherwise, I would never finish it, or I would never even get to it. Or if I did actually get through the book, it would take me forever. So with that background going in, let's talk about how I got started. So the first thing I did, and this is my first big tip, was that I tied my reading to another habit or activity that I was already doing. So for me, this was bedtime. Usually before I fell asleep, I would sit up in bed looking at my phone, you know, just scrolling. So that was a time that I already had. It consistently happened. I go to sleep every night and I was consistently looking at my phone right before bed. So I just wanted to wrap some reading up into that. Make it so that reading was the last thing I did before I fell asleep. Now, it wasn't about reading for a certain amount of time or like a certain number of pages or chapters or anything like that. It didn't even have to be a book, it just had to be something. So it could be a book, but it could be a magazine article or, you know, some other type of article or something that I wanted to read. It also didn't have to replace my phone time. So when I was first getting started, I would still look on my phone before bed, but it was just that after that, I had to read something. Even if it was a little something, read something that wasn't scrolling mindlessly through social media. It was really about establishing that routine of reading. And honestly, it's similar to how I recommend people make dietary changes. No big giant overhauls or radical shifts where everything is changing, you know, just like that, and it's gonna be changed forever. It was a small change that did take some effort. It was something new. It was something I was trying to do. I had to spend some energy trying to make it happen, but it was also doable. It was manageable. It wasn't so big that it became overwhelming or impossible and just, you know, led me to give up. And so if you want to do this yourself, it doesn't have to be reading at bedtime, though that does seem to be like a popular time for a lot of people to read. It just has to be something that is some effort, but not overwhelming. So it could be listening to an audiobook when you're getting ready or like doing your morning commute. It could be reading a little bit on your lunch break. There might be another time or activity that you could tie your reading to, but it's really about finding something that you are already doing consistently and just kind of like attaching the reading to that and kind of piggybacking on that already existing habit to make reading a new habit. But once you get started, how do you keep the ball rolling? So for me, as far as keeping that routine going, one thing that really helped, and this is my next tip, is to have a list going of the books that you want to read next. For me, one of my biggest struggles when it came to reading consistently was knowing what to even read. How do you know what's out there? How do you know what's good? And then if you're not reading that many books, maybe you're only reading one book a year or maybe 2 books a year right now, it can make it even harder to find a book to read because there's a lot of pressure on it, right? Like if you're just gonna read 1 or 2 books, you want them to be good, you want to be entertained, you wanna love them, you wanna learn something, whatever it may be. You don't want that one book to be a flop. And so it can make it really hard to figure out what to even read in the first place. So with this in mind, I started keeping a list of the books I wanted to read next, and I started to consciously pay attention to the book recommendations that were already happening all around me. So if I was listening to a podcast on a certain topic and maybe they interviewed an expert and they mentioned that that expert had a book where you could learn more, I'd write the name of that book down. If I was chatting with a friend and they mentioned a book that they read recently that they really liked, I'd write that book down. If I was watching a YouTube video and someone mentioned a book that they had read recently and they enjoyed, sounded interesting to me, write that book down. Now, I wasn't necessarily committing to reading every single one of the books on this list, but what it did is it gave me this list to work from when I finished a book. When I finished reading a book, instead of being like lost, like, well, what's next? I had this whole list of books that at least to some degree I was kind of interested in, and I could look at that and see if there was something that I would want to read next. And that really played a big part in solidifying the reading habit for me. People who read a lot, this is something that I've learned, they know what book they're gonna read after they finish the book that they're currently reading, or at the very least they have a few books in mind that could be like the next book they're gonna read. And it makes such a big difference when you can finish a book and jump right into another book. It really helps you keep that ball rolling rather than getting stalled or stuck because you're not sure where to go next. So for me, that meant looking up videos about books that I had read and really liked to find people who were talking about those books, and then seeing what other books those people were talking about. I started looking at top 10 or top books of the year list videos, people's favorite books, people's favorite books in certain genres, all that kind of thing, and getting recommendations from those videos. And also, as I was looking at all these individual videos, I would start finding creators that kind of they either liked the types of books that I liked, or I liked their vibe or whatever, and then I could subscribe to their channels and really get consistent book recommendations by watching their videos as they came out. Another tool that I found really helpful was the NPR Books We Love tool. It's just a web page, and they do a new kind of section every year, but you can go back and look at past years. And I really liked it, or still like it, because a lot of media companies and organizations and individual creators do their top 10 lists, their top 20 lists. But with the NPR Books We Love tool, it's kind of like a filtering system. So they have all of their book recommendations in there, but it has hundreds of books, and you can filter by category, you can combine different categories. And I really, really like that, because as I was reading more and learning more about the types of things I like, the types of books I like, genres, topics, all that kind of thing, I could go in there and start filtering through to find the things that would really match with me and my interests. Now, all the tips I've given so far and the kind of process I've described that I've gone through, This was not happening over the course of just 1 year. I want to be very clear about that. The first year when I first started going with this, I read 8 books that year. And that was huge for me. That was amazing because I'd had so many years where I struggled to even get through 1 book. Then the next year after that, I read 25 books that year. And that was like unbelievable. Like I couldn't believe it. It was amazing. But then this past year, I read 50 books, which still doesn't even sound like a real thing to me. Like I can look back and be like, oh yeah, I read all those books, but it's so just above and beyond what I ever could have thought possible. And you know, if you told me 3 years ago that I would be reading 50 books in 1 calendar year, I totally wouldn't have believed that at all. So it's just like huge, but it didn't happen like that. Again, it was a process that I was building upon. I wasn't setting a hard deadline on it or anything like that, but slowly and steadily, I continued to build the habit. And now I've gotten to the point where I've read 50 books in a year. And that brings me to the next thing I did, which was I tracked the books that I read. Now, there are a few ways that you can keep a record of the books that you're reading. You can do it in a notebook, you could do it in a spreadsheet. There's also online tools like Storygraph or Goodreads that you can use. But I have found, kind of no matter what method you use, that tracking the books that you're reading can be really helpful. Now, I will say there was a part of my brain that was a little hesitant to track my books because I have a little bit of a dislike for tracking in general based on my experience as a dietitian. I a lot of times see tracking happen with food, and it can be really, really harmful and damaging. And same thing with exercise. So I didn't want to get in a really unhealthy place with tracking the books where it felt like really stressful or pressure, because the whole point of this was to do something fun, to do something that would be good for my mental health, to have something that I would enjoy, and I didn't want it to become like a negative thing. But tracking books I have found to only be a positive experience for me. And the reason I really like it is because it's helped me to learn a lot about what types of books that I like. It can be really easy to kind of forget the books that you've read. Honestly, if I hadn't been like writing down all the books I've been reading, I never would have guessed that I had read 50 books this year even. But when I look back at the books, I can start to see patterns. I can start to see certain genres that I really liked. I can start to see authors that I like or topics that I like or things that really weren't that great for me. And so being able to look back and see what I've read and get kind of more of a zoomed out view has really been helpful for me to have even more success with my reading and get even more excited, because it's helped me to learn about the things that I like and maybe the things that I don't like so much. Another thing with tracking your books is you can set some goals for yourself. Now, I didn't do this in the beginning because again, the small step I was taking was just to read at all. But after, I kind of got consistent with that and had started the habit, I did start setting goals for myself. Not anything that would be like so unattainable that it would be stressful, but just kind of a little something that I thought I could do. And again, it's increased each year, but having that goal helped me to make time for doing the reading. I had the habit established, but at least for me, I sometimes will like not do the things that I know that I like, or the things that I know make me happy or make me feel relaxed or whatever, because something in my brain is like, it's not productive, or like if you're liking it too much, then I don't know. It's not a healthy thing. I'm aware of that, but I do know it's a tendency that I have, is like to not allow myself to have the things that I like or do the things that I want. So for me, having those goals helps me to be like, no, you want to do this thing. This is what you're trying to do. Let's actually make it happen, because it's a thing that you like. It's a thing that you enjoy. And you can do it, and having this little goal helps you to stay on track and make sure that you're making time for that thing that you like, which is reading, which is crazy to say, but hey, I like reading now. That's pretty fun. And really all of these things have kind of connected together to create a snowball effect for me. As I read more, I become more aware of the books that are out there. As I become more aware of the books that are out there, I start reading more different types of things. And with that, I learn more about my own taste, and then I can more successfully find books that I will like. And when I'm reading books that I like, it only makes me want to read more. And if I do happen to read a book that isn't great for me or I didn't really love, it's not that big of a deal because it's such a small drop in the overall, big picture of all the books that I'm gonna read. And I know that there's so many other more books out there that I have on my list that I'm excited for. So it's just kind of like, oh, that one didn't do it, move on and go on to the next thing that you're really excited to read. Now, everything we've talked about so far, I think is a really good overview of like my process and progress of how I actually made reading a habit. But there are a lot of other little things that I've learned, little tips and tricks along the way that have also helped me to read more. So now let's get into some of those. So first up is to stop reading books just because you feel like you should read them. There are a lot of books out there that are very popular, or they're classics, or they're important, or whatever it may be. But that doesn't mean that they're the books for you, especially when you're just getting started with reading. If you're having trouble reading right now, reading the things that you think you should read instead of reading the things that you actually want to read isn't going to help. Now, once you're reading consistently, I think there's definitely something to be said for, reading books that you don't enjoy in the purest sense of the word, but maybe that you're reading because you do want to learn something. You feel like, this book might be able to teach you something, or maybe because something is popular and you want to see what all the fuss is about, but that's not the place to start. If you start with those, you're just going to end up not reading anything because it's such a drag and you're not enjoying it. So instead, why not read the books that you want to read, get that reading habit established, and once you've got things going and you're feeling good, then maybe that is the time to mix in some of those other books if you want to, but once you already have the reading thing consistently happening. And related to that is my next tip, which is to give yourself permission to stop reading a book if you're not enjoying it. I know it can feel not great to not finish a book that you're partway through. I definitely have felt that way. I'm kind of a completionist with pretty much everything. So to read partway through a book and then put it down and not finish it just felt like so impossible to me. But I have started to do it. I've gotten better at it as I've been reading more. And I highly recommend it. Life is too short to read books that you're not enjoying, that you're not getting anything from. If you're not liking it, just don't. Especially if you've been doing some of these other things like getting a list going and paying attention to book recommendations and you're aware of other books that you would want to read, read those things and don't read the thing that you're hating. It's just not worth it. And also, sometimes it's just not the right time for a book. Isn't that right, Luna? Luna agrees. Sometimes it's just not the right time. Maybe there's a book that it's not the right time for it now. You're really hating it. But later on, you could really love it. You're just not in the right mindset or the right mood or the right stage of life or whatever. It could be a few months from now. It could be years from now that you could read that book and really like it. But if you force yourself through it now while you're hating it, you might be kind of cheating yourself out of the opportunity to really love a book. Because you made yourself read it when you were hating it. So just put it down. If you're not liking it, move on to the next thing and know that you can always come back to it in the future if you want to. Next up, and I think this is something that Luna would really agree with, is to try different formats. So if you are getting back into reading or getting started with reading for the first time, it's really important to know that there's a lot of different ways that you can read a book. It doesn't have to be sitting down and reading a physical book. You could do ebooks, you can do audiobooks, you can do a combination, but look for the different formats that are out there and consider what might work best for you. Everyone is different, so figure out what you like. For me, I have found that I really prefer reading the physical book if I can. I like holding it in my hand and having that progress of flipping through the pages as opposed to a percentage on the screen that you get with an ebook. And for me right now, I'm also not trying to listen to a lot of audiobooks because I already listen to a lot of other audio content. I listen to a lot of podcasts. So, you know, it would mean kind of replacing those maybe with audiobooks, and I'm not really looking, you know, I don't have a lot of other time that I'm trying to listen to more audio than I already am, if that makes sense. And also for me, a big part of wanting to read more, like I mentioned, was trying to disconnect from my phone a little bit. So even though with an audiobook, you're not like looking at the screen the whole time, it feels more like connected to that device, and it seems like it would be easier for me to like get distracted by notifications and things like that. So for me, physical books are what I'm loving. Could be different for you. You might, you know, find that, you know, something right now is the right thing, but then later it changes. Same thing could happen to me, you know, like maybe in the future I'll be into doing more of another format, but just keep in mind that there are a lot of different formats out there. And so, you know, there's no one right way to do it. So figure out what you like and what works best for you. Now, another thing you can try with formats is my next tip, which is to read one book in multiple formats at the same time. This is something that never occurred to me. I don't know why. I just thought like if you're listening to a book on audio, like that's how you're reading it. If you're reading the physical book, that's how you're reading it. If you're doing an ebook, that's how you're reading it. But what I have learned is that a lot of people do one book in multiple formats to make it work for them. So maybe you are listening to a book when you get ready in the morning, but then you're reading the physical book at night, and you just go to, you know, wherever you left off and pick up with the other format there. Some people like to read the book visually, either an ebook or a physical book, and also listen to the audiobook at the same time. So there's a lot of different ways you can do it, but, you know, get creative. Think about, you know, would that help you read more? If you could match a couple formats together to make your reading more flexible so you can do it in more settings and more quickly get through a book, it might help you to kind of, you know, get that ball rolling and get things started, or to help you keep reading consistently if you have different formats available. Well, my camera died and my cat has left, but we're charged back up and we're gonna keep going. As I was saying about reading books in multiple formats, I think one reason that I had never considered like reading the same book in multiple formats at the same time is that I kind of always thought about it like you would be buying each one, and that's just not super reasonable. But did you know that you can get books for free? There are these things called libraries. Yes, Luna's back. Luna's back. Luna wants to talk about libraries. Okay, now obviously I've always known what libraries are and that you can get books from them for free. But if you haven't been reading a lot lately, you might not be aware of how much you can get from your library now that isn't a physical book. So of course you can get physical books, but you can get ebooks, you can get audiobooks. You don't even have to go to the library to get those things. You just check them out digitally. So it makes it really accessible, and it makes it really convenient to read the same book in multiple formats at the same time. Now, every library is a little different. They might not have every book in every single format, but a lot of times, especially with really popular books, they will have it in multiple formats. So, you know, yes, this is the next tip, is to use your library. If you don't have a membership to your local library, get one. They're really great, and they offer so much in addition to the physical books that you might be thinking about. But the other thing with libraries that I had never thought about is, in addition to joining your local library, join multiple libraries. This had just never occurred to me, but you know, there might be other libraries you could join that would have more or different materials from what your local library has. So like, in my case, I have a small local library. They're great. They have a lot of books, but they don't always have everything that I want to read. And if there's something I really do want to read and they don't have it, then that means I'll need to buy it, right? Well, I found out that a regional library that is kind of like the next town over from me, it's not super convenient to get to, but it's like not impossible and I can make it happen. They have a larger selection. And so a lot of the books that I wanted to read that I couldn't find at my local library, I could get at this other library. And It's just an annual fee since I'm not a resident. I pay $30 a year for this particular library, which I think is super reasonable considering that they have access, like by being a member, I have access to a bunch of books that I don't have at my smaller local library and that if I wanted to read, I would be buying anyway. So it totally makes sense for me. So, you know, especially if you live in a smaller town, look at the other libraries. Do not hit me in the face with your tail. Look at the other libraries around you and see if you can join, even if you aren't in their like resident coverage area. And another thing to think about too are even libraries that are even farther away. So your state might have like a state library system, or there might be a very large city in your state, if you're, you know, I'm talking about the US right now, that you could access and get a membership to. Could be free, you might have to pay, really depends, you know, on each individual situation. But either way, check it out because it could be a good option. You could get access, again, to a lot of materials that maybe you can't get at your local library. And even if it's like not convenient for you to go there, it still might be worth it depending on their digital selection. It might be worth it to you just for the ebooks and the audiobooks and access to digital magazines and newspapers and things like that. So definitely look into the other libraries, consider joining multiples, and you know, see what your library has because you might be surprised at the breadth of things that they have available. Another tip that can help is to always take your book with you wherever you go. You just want to make it as easy as possible for you to read. Luna is like not, she's just jumping up and jumping down. She's gonna make sure that she's a full-on distraction this whole video. But the more convenient it is for you to read, the more likely you're gonna do it. So for me, this means even throughout the house, like whether it's taking it to bed at night or bringing it into like the common areas during the day so it's easy for me to pick up, or bringing it to my desk. Sometimes I've done that because sometimes when you're working on something and like your brain needs a break, at least for me, my default is to like open another tab on my computer to do something or to look at my phone. In those times, I can read instead. So I just take my book all with me throughout the house. If you're leaving the house, take it with you then, whether it's a physical book or an ebook or an audio book, because there may be little moments where you can read your book, maybe if you're waiting for something. Again, a lot of times where I think nowadays a lot of us look at our phones, you can be reading instead. And for me, especially, like that's always a plus because part of my reading goal is to use my phone less and instead to be reading more. On the flip side of that, when you do have dedicated reading time, when it's not just like these little margins or trying to make it convenient for yourself, but the times where you are sitting down to be like, I am reading right now, my next tip is to make it a nice environment. Create a nice environment for yourself. Make it cozy, comfortable, be in comfy clothes, you know, snuggle up under a blanket. Maybe it means like getting the lighting right so, you know, it's relaxing, but it's like not too bright, but you can still read. It's not too dark. Think about having beverages, you know, some water, a mug of tea, whatever, just making it really cozy and nice. And especially if you're having trouble focusing, because I think again, for a lot of us, at least for myself, attention spans, like we feel them getting shorter and shorter and shorter, and it's not a great feeling. But when you're trying to start, you know, reading again, if you're doing it with that in mind, like I want to increase my attention span, in the beginning, you're gonna maybe be battling that shortened attention span and having trouble like focusing on reading a book. So in that case, the cozy environment can really help. I also think having on some music or background noise can be really nice, again, to help you focus, something that's not distracting, like lo-fi music or instrumentals, or even like ambient sounds like, you know, a coffee shop or a fireplace or something like that. Just something that can kind of help your brain focus in. Also, if you are distracted by your phone in particular, like if you're worried about like always looking at the time, how long you've been reading, how long you have to read, what you can do next, you're getting distracted by notifications, all that kind of thing. Something else you can do to help with this environment is to set a timer. Just setting a timer that you can say, I want to read for this amount of time, and you know that it fits with your schedule. You're not going to like be late for something. It's also like, you know, if you know in that amount of time you can look at your notifications or whatever, set that timer, and then you can just read and not be thinking in the back of your brain about like, what time is it? Has anyone messaged me? What's going on? Because you know when the timer goes off, then you can look and check those things or move on to the next thing on your schedule or whatever it may be. All of these little things that create this nice environment can make it easier for you to read, to get more reading done, and to just enjoy your reading more as well. And like I said, I think a lot of these tips can apply to other types of habits that you're doing, you know, making it convenient for yourself, setting reasonable goals, all that kind of thing. But also, I do want to mention that these are things, you know, that have worked for me, whether you're looking at other health habits or reading in particular. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily all going to exactly work for you. So also, paying attention to yourself, like reflecting on what's working, what's not working. What is your reason for wanting to read more? Is that happening? What are some of your barriers that get in the way? All that kind of thing really makes the difference because it's going to be personalized to you. What things that you find difficult, what things you find less challenging, all the particulars of your situation. So of course, always reflect on that, check in, and see what is going to be best for you and what's going to help you to accomplish your goals of reading more or whatever goals you might be setting. And let me know in the comments, where are you with this? Are you just getting started with reading? Have you gotten started but you're trying to keep the ball rolling and trying to figure out ways to read more? Whatever it may be, I would love to hear about what your experience has been and what you're hoping to do with regards to reading. And I wish you the best in your reading. I am looking forward to another great year of reading. I know that my reading isn't always going to stay the same. It's going to change from year to year and throughout my life as things, you know, change with me and what's going on. But I do feel like I've been able to set this new habit and really develop a love for reading, which is something that I never had before. And I think no matter how many books I'm reading each year, this love for reading that I've found is really something that's going to stick with me. So with that, I hope you're having a great day. I'll see you in the next video, and Luna might see you in the next video as well. We'll see. Bye.